Okay, so that's it. I can't express how excited I am about this panel, but just so you guys know, we now have a tradition at DERVOS that started last year, which is we save like the headiest, most intense conversation for the very end of the day. So I hope everyone had a coffee because we might go deep on this one. But yeah, I'm gonna sort of tee things up, but I thought we could just start by having each of you introduce yourself briefly and what you're doing today.
Sure thing. Hi, Drew Baglino. I'm the founder and CEO of Heron Power. Prior to that, I was at Tesla for 18 years, helping to build the foundations of an electrostate in the United States. But that's probably enough for me.
I'm Sam D'Amico, CEO at Impulse Labs. We build very high-performance stoves. I think we have some customers in the audience, including folks picking them up this weekend. Backgrounds in consumer electronics. Yeah. You may have used VR headsets I worked on before I got into this whole adventure.
Good to see everyone. Tristan Doherty, Chief Product Officer at LG Energy Solution Vertec. The LG Energy Solution part of that is huge, massive scale U.S. manufacturing of lithium-ion LFP batteries, starting in Michigan and expanding beyond that quite a bit in the next year or so. The Vertec part of that is the full end-to-end system integration. So we're the U.S. office doing all grid-scale energy storage for LG Energy Solution.
Super. And I'm Dan Walter. I'm a principal at Ember Energy, an NGO that focuses on open source data on the energy transition. I myself am the principal energy strategist, so we focus on global research of where the transition is going.
And you guys know me. The only thing I'll add is, unlike this crew, I don't have a ton of experience actually in what we're going to talk about, other than a few years back wrote an article called The Age of Electron, which I think was had way too much time on my hands during COVID exploration into what we're now talking about with electrostates. And so I'm very excited to learn directly from you guys. But I thought I may start by just saying I myself on this topic am I kind of want to use this to solve like an internal debate. Like I'm on the one hand very hopeful about where we can go, but also some days can be pessimistic or fearful. And that is around this emerging conversation about electrostates. And the US is very clearly a petrostate today. I wonder are we going to get left behind in this transition? Are we going to be able to lead a historic transition in becoming an electrostate? And is that the right thing to do, and how? And so I think we're going to explore that today. But maybe to start, a simple way of thinking about this is, I'll propose a theory that you can just sort of look at the rise and fall of empires as a function of who dominates the cheapest energy source and their conversion technologies, right? So Britain had coal and the steam engine, but they declined as oil and the internal combustion engine came along, which catapulted the US into our position in the first and very clearly dominant petrostate. Britain didn't have a lot of oil, so there wasn't much they could do there. And now, with electricity fast becoming the dominant energy input, China is emerging as Jesse alluded to earlier, as the first and most dominant electrostate. So are we destined to the same fate as the Brits in that framing? I hope not. Because on the other hand, America has some of the most incredibly rich energy resources across natural gas, solar, wind on the planet, unlike the Brits not having oil. And so could leaning into becoming an electrostate potentially usher in a new era of American growth and prosperity? So I'd like to answer two questions, which is why would we want to become an electrostate and how do we get there? But to start, you guys have all done incredible thinking, each one of you in your own ways on this topic. And so I'm going to give you all as much time as you need to just like introduce your frameworks, right? And I think we just work down the stage. So Drew, we're obviously going to want to hear a lot about Heron Power and everything, but you did lead the Tesla Master Plan 3 and did a lot of incredible thinking behind sort of an electric world, right? And so I'd love to just sort of hear your vision for that. And we'll start with you, and then I'll tee up the rest of your guys' concepts. But
yeah, thanks, James, for that. So I was fortunate enough to lead the build-out of both Tesla's in-house cell manufacturing program in Fremont, California, and then in Texas. In the end, we're We've built somewhere around 50 gigawatt hours of manufacturing capacity of a novel cell form factor in the United States, but also, design and ramp like the Powerwall 3, Powerwall 1, 2, and 3, PowerPack, Megapack, all of these energy products in the US, and go through the sort of supply chain building effort, the manufacturing capacity building effort for those products, and doing the same for the supercharger from kind of version 1 to where it is now. And in all of that, what I learned is that there isn't like some magic ingredient that exists in China that means that they necessarily will be more capable of manufacturing something than we are in the US. Because everything I just described, we did in the US first, and in some cases we did overseas afterwards, but actually in all cases we're still doing in the US, or Tesla is still doing in the US. I'm not at Tesla anymore. Always got to be careful about that. So there's not some like secret ingredient. I think it's a question of will and capital allocation and businesses making rational decisions in response to the stimuli, on like where they can get the best return and the stable return. And China has just made that decision-making calculus so easy for the participants in their market about like, where should I make a battery factory investment? Where should I make a solar factory investment? Where do I know I'm going to get my return on investment? And the U.S. has made it hard. And why has the U.S. made it hard? I don't think it's inevitable that it will always be hard in the U.S. Actually, I think you have to zoom out and say, what's going on with China? China was, over the past 3 decades, like they were like zooming out, the planners, they're like, we want to have sustained GDP growth, we want to increase GDP per capita, we want to elevate our citizens, we want lots of opportunities, and meanwhile, we currently import all of our energy resources. So that seems like a problem. And so along the way of developing their nation, they were like, we should also become energy independent. It makes sense. And now they're not still energy independent, right? Like they still import a ton of oil, they still import a lot of coal and natural gas, but they are like very consciously like moving off of that to be as energy independent as possible by all of the government policies they've made. Now, in the US, it's a complicated story. We're imbued with immense natural resources, wind, solar, everything else, but also all of these uber cheap, through technology development, natural gas and other fossil resources. So it's not as obvious a political decision, and that is why when you're making an investment decision as a company, it's like, well, which way will the political winds blow? I don't know. I mean, at some point, it will be obvious, and the U.S., I think, will, at that point, rapidly progress. It's already progressing the direction. Sorry to continue to talk here, but it's already progressing the direction of becoming an electrostate. LG is making big investments, like Tesla did. I am personally, with my investment and building Heron Power to be a power electronics company to accelerate electrification. And I think at some point in the future, it will go even faster because the policy winds will always blow in the same direction. But have no doubt in your mind, like China did it because it was necessary, right? Like they don't have an alternative where the U.S. does. Let's be fair.
Okay, there's so much to unpack there. We're going to use the full panel time. I'm excited. Before we do that, Sam, you've been putting out some amazing stuff recently on the electrotech stack concept, and so I'd love for you to just like walk through what that is. Just take it away.
Yeah, so there's an article that came out maybe a month ago with Packy McCormick, who is a far better writer than me, so I want to make sure that I credit him with writing most of the article. But the ideas were actually stuff that I've been circulating with him, with Noah Smith, with a couple others as well over the past several months. But basically, the idea is that there are like 4 critical technologies that every machine will be built out of in the future, and that's like batteries, particularly lithium-ion batteries, power electronics, particularly like gallium nitride, silicon carbide, and also just like better silicon MOSFETs even, and then embedded compute. Like the fact that we basically can put tons of flops anywhere and control those power electronics and battery systems really effectively. And then the last piece is electromagnetics, so converting basically the energy from the batteries into motion or heat if it's a stove or something like that. And effectively, one of the reasons that China has been able to sprint ahead is it turns out that like we can now build everything like we build consumer electronics. And like Tesla obviously pioneered being able to, like if you tear down a Ford automobile, the level of introspection into the custom components in that vehicle is, their engineers were kind of like buying stuff more or less off the shelf. That's why their infotainment systems like only just recently got good, because there was a 5-year lag time on the component suppliers and stuff like that. Versus, say, Apple, they designed a custom camera for every model of iPhone. And so as we're starting to see like building these kind of different size machines, like medium size and large machines, whether they're cars or stoves or what have you, more like consumer electronics, the other thing that's happening in parallel is all of these devices are starting to use the same fundamental building blocks of the electric tech stack. And what this means is if you get good at manufacturing, say, smartphones, you can switch to killer drones tomorrow and use the same factory, the same facilities, and the same underlying supply chains. And this has not really happened before. It used to kind of be that like we'd have a different technology tree for different technologies. It's like, okay, if like the steam engine and like how factories worked in the 1800s, going to kind of like a fully electrified factory of the like World War II sort of era and beyond, like basically like these things were fundamental technological shifts that required like a new way of doing stuff versus, oh cool, a consumer electronics factory can build everything from a humanoid robot to a car. Like Xiaomi has built cars now, of all things. And they're one of the better car makers, surprisingly enough, even though 10 years ago they only made phones. This is going to be the thing that's going to happen just more generally. And this is something where it's entirely enabled by the fact that there's a transition to this new technology stack. And then the second piece of it, or the other piece of this that you mentioned is just like fundamentally, we're not switching to these technologies because of policy reasons. We're shifting to these technologies because they're better. And like I think I bet I'm anticipating a debate in Congress in like a year or two, trying to reveal the fully hybrid or a series hybrid infantry fighting vehicle at their military parade a couple months ago. I think we had a panel a couple of DERVOSes ago where I mentioned that the tanks were going to go woke. They have, and China did it. And so this actually did happen. It was not just me making a thing aside. But why are the tanks going woke? Well, they're going woke because woke is better in this case. But basically what's going on is because of pure performance reasons, everything is going to adopt this set of technologies. And for that reason, getting good at manufacturing them in the United States is a critical need. And then the other thing is, what's cool about it is you can be building stuff like what Heron's building, what we're building. You can build phones. You can build like large-scale ESS systems. And it turns out that these actually end up using much more overlapping supply chains than people would actually think.
Yeah, totally.
Again, so much to unpack there. So I'm going to come back to a few things you touched on. Tristan, I've not engaged with your public thinking as much as Packy McCormick's incredibly long article. But I'd love for you to also just tee up how you think about the electrostate.
Yeah, no, and first I'll say I'm so glad to be at a conference where everyone talks as fast as I do, because everyone's got so much going on up there. But no, we're brothers here. I think very aligned with Drew in terms of how we view building out the U.S. supply chains and building out a U.S. domestic manufacturing ecosystem, where maybe I both agree and disagree, is that I think that there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of like, how do I invest the next dollar? Because I don't know if next year or next month or frankly next hour, it's going to be the right dollar to invest. But if you have the ability as an organization to take a step back and look at a bit of a macro picture, it's been clear, and it's been clear and aligned for the last 2, 3, 4, 5, and count as many administrations as you can count back. Yeah. And everyone has said, look, we need to make sure that we have secure supply chains, that we're starting to divest ourselves from a country who may or may not be friendly, but maybe we're just over-leveraged over there and we need to bring some of it back, right? And so if you play that angle and you say, okay, I'm going to look at the horizon, I'm headed in that direction, there's going to be some bumps along the way, and as long as you have a balance sheet and the ability as an organization either to build a portfolio of different stuff, so some of it works, some of it doesn't, or if you can just ride through those bumps, I think it pays in dividends. And I think that's where we are at. We invested hugely into the EV supply chain. We had something like 300 gigawatt hours of EV battery manufacturing supply here in the US. And guess what? The EV market hasn't quite turned out to what everyone expected it to be. But second, guess what? The ESS market is turning into something that's really exciting. And so when we started off, it was, we'll build 4 gigawatt hours of LFP cells for ESS. Maybe that'll be interesting. And then quickly it turned into 16, then it turned into 20, then it turned into 30, then it turned into 40, and who knows where it's going to go. But because we saw that long-term view of divest yourself from an over-leveraged supply chain partner, then bring it into the States, we were in a position to take advantage, be able to pivot and take advantage of that. And so I think that's frankly where we're at. Now, what I unfortunately worry about is that not every company is the size of LG that can just plop down $25 billion and say we're going to build a huge manufacturing position. And there's a lot of great technology that's coming out of this country. There's a lot of really cool startups that are doing some really interesting things. And unfortunately, a little hiccup in policy that goes the wrong way can kill that. And that I find unfortunate. And that is sort of the price of a really the uncertainty of the environment we're in now, and perhaps the Chinese environment where there's a lot more, okay, go this way and you'll make your money back, right? We guarantee it. I think that can help some of that stuff. So it's a mix. I'm not necessarily as pessimistic as some people are in terms of the ability to build out a U.S. supply chain. I just think that we could obviously be doing it. We could be leveraging a lot more efficiency here.
I think there's one other thing I would add, people believe, or maybe some people believe, that there is a lack of collaboration globally on these technologies. But actually, it's incredibly global. Whether you're talking about power electronics or batteries, or magnetics, or any of the things, compute, that Sam mentioned. And so actually, a lot of the capital equipment that is involved in making these objects, are provided by a series of service providers that are global in nature. And you can actually choose to hey, we're going to build a 100 gigawatt hour facility in the US, like LG did. And you're able to get that equipment in, you're able to ramp that facility in with the support of experts from around the world and get it going. So if at any point a pivot to go faster was needed, it could be done. Yeah. And I think while it's easy to say, why is China able to do it and we're not? I think that's oversimplifying the situation. It really is.
I'm so glad you guys brought this up, because we're going to drill even deeper on this. I realize I should have started with Dan, because you have perfected, in my view, the electrostate framework. So we're going to let you go, and then we're going to start diving in.
That was a great presentation the other day too.
It was amazing.
Thank you. We launched our flagship report, the Electrotech Revolution, a few weeks back. And this report was really, a labor of love, but also labor of frustration with the current energy debate, right? Because we're kind of stuck between these two camps at the moment, where on the one hand, we have sort of this fossil gradualist view that, there's no energy transition, there's only energy addition going on, this sort of framing that fossil fuels are the pinnacle of human invention. And on the other hand, we have a much more sort of almost like technocratic view of the energy system as a problem to be solved. It's a net zero or bust attitude, where we need to solve this by 2050 or we might as well give up. And we're perpetually kind of annoyed by this attitude towards the energy sector and in this framing. And when we look sort of under the hood of the new exciting energy technologies that we're seeing, we're very much in agreement, I think, on this stage with that. These are, on the supply side, wind and solar, new electric generation. On the demand side, it's EVs and electric vehicles. It is grids and batteries in between that make these things communicate with new software. But the magnetic center that all these new exciting technologies are around is the electron, right? This is not clean tech. It is electrotech. It is new electric technology that is just superior. And we keep making this sort of category error by looking at these new technologies and saying, that's energy. And then we look at the smartphones, that's tech. But these technologies are actually much closer to each other than many people actually appreciate. And so we started writing this report with this argument listen, this started well before a Paris Agreement or a Kyoto Accord, right? It's not that this technology magically appeared when we agreed we were going to do something about climate change. This happened, decades and decades and decades of innovation. This is something our parents and our grandparents worked on. We're just now living in a very exciting decade where all this technology is kind of converging together, becoming cost competitive and talking to each other with digital and AI systems. And we live in an exciting decade, but it's not by no means driven by climate action. And talking about drivers, so the origins are much before climate action. The drivers as well run much more, much deeper we see than just climate push. The way we see it, you have just three fundamental drivers of change for electrotech, which is physics, economics, and geopolitics. On the physics side, electrotech is roughly 3 times more efficient than the incumbent fossil technology. It is based on the systems of electrodynamics rather than thermodynamics. And thermodynamically, you're just going to lose 2/3 of your energy that you put into your energy system to get useful work out. You don't have that with electrodynamics, and it's just more efficient and a leaner way to set up your system. Economics, these are small and modular technologies that benefit from Wright's law, right? A version of Moore's law. They become cheaper the more you make as we get learning. Fossil fuels, of course, the more you want, the deeper you need to dig. So any technology innovation you have and that would reduce cost is offset by the fact that you need to dig deeper. And so at some point, these two things overlap and cross, and that has just happened. And from here on out, electrotech is only getting cheaper. And third is geopolitics. I mean, less felt in the US, as you put it, Drew, because in the US it's much less urgent because the US has built its own fossil fortress, I think, at the moment and is independent right now. But for many countries in the world, like my own, I'm from the Netherlands myself, that is definitely not the case. Energy security is top of the agenda. 75% of the global population lives in countries that are net importers. A quarter of the world imports for more than 5% of their GDP in energy. These countries are looking everywhere at the moment to find energy securities. And at some point, they will look towards the sky and go like, you know what? I have more than enough solar power to power my own energy system once, twice, 3 times over. If we're looking at countries, for instance, Africa, we're talking about 1,000 times over. So obviously, at some point, these countries are going to realize, and that's what we're seeing right now with the stories that we're seeing in Pakistan, and I'm sure this crowd is familiar with that, a rapid change to move towards electrotech. And so we shouldn't be surprised, I think, that I'll close on that, is we shouldn't be surprised that given that so many people misunderstand the origins of electrotech and misunderstand the drivers, that we keep underestimating the pace of change, right? And so every year the IEA comes out with yet another upwards correction, whoops, we were wrong again. And it happened time and again, and just because the fundamental view of the world, I think in German, the Weltanschauung, right? The way that you approach, the way that you see change happen is just wrong in energy right now. And so that's our main theory.
I want to put a finer point on this. Something you said to me yesterday, which I found very funny, was that you were talking about how the climate view of the world is almost bristling at the success of, say, China and other developing countries at leapfrogging and actually leading the charge here because they weren't part of the Paris Accord. And the climate community was saying, hey, we're going to sign these agreements, and then that's what's going to make everything happen. And everyone's just blown past this, actually. And they're sort of upset in a way, actually, that it could happen without them holding the keys, right? So I want to loop back to something that Sam started in to basically unpack, again, we're taking a very U.S. specific lens here, I think, because I think we're here in the U.S., but what the state of the world is of these critical technologies. And, I would say, that's the electric tech stack, but also things like transformers and solar. I know, and you guys aren't necessarily actively working on building solar right now. But Sam said something very interesting of almost the consumer electronics as a door into we are building the stack in that, but also that, as at least in my limited understanding, a lot of that manufacturing is actually, maybe we're designing it in the US, but Apple's building it somewhere else. And so just across the board on the most important technologies in the electro tech stack, where are we today? What are the biggest gaps? And then maybe as we progress, how we can start closing those gaps.
Wow,
anyone can jump in.
That is a large prompt.
I have a very spicy take, which is GM had the Infinity Stones on their fist in friggin' 1987 or something like that. They had an IGBT group. They had some advanced battery stuff going on. Lithium-ion had obviously not been really pioneered yet. They had MagnaQuench. They invented neodymium iron boron magnets, and they had all this embedded compute stuff with DSPs and other things like that. So they had every single piece of the electric tech stack in 1987 or something.
Well, the U.S. basically invented all of it.
And we invented all of it.
Solar panel at Bell Labs.
And I'm saying freaking GM had all of it, and could have been Tesla. They went and entered the World Solar Challenge and whooped everyone's butt. like with a vehicle that basically was like, let's demonstrate all of the stuff we could actually pull out of our research labs and school a bunch of kids or whatever. And this is mostly a college competition. But basically but basically the point is like we invented all this stuff from like the speak and spell, allowing us to ramp up DSP production with Texas Instruments, to Detroit techno basically being downstream of all that stuff. It's kind of crazy. But we invented all these things, and then we basically decided, hey, let's go hand them to people who know how to do the more detailed manufacturing. And then it turned out that like the actual industrial capacity to go make these things became more important as process engineering and other things like that became more in vogue. And I would say that there's one engineering discipline that I think is just not taught in the United States, which is like building stuff in volume in the consumer electronics way, and then like looking at the statistics of it. And I guess we did invent the whole Six Sigma thing, kind of, and then we gave it to the Japanese and they gave it back to us. But basically, the thinking here is like, there is a way to perfectly engineer one of something, and then there's the way that like China and some of these other countries have actually figured out, like, we're gonna build a lot of these things and then figure out through the process engineering, like, how to actually make stuff like highly reliable lithium-ion batteries and stuff like that. And so I think some of those skills slipped away over the decades, and then the efficiencies,
I just think they're in different places, maybe. I did, as one of my aspects of my former role, like go from no real internal knowledge about how to make batteries to making, tens of gigawatt hours per year over the course of, from basically 2019 to 2024, 5 years, doing it all vertically integrated with completely new processes that had not been done before. It's like, you're right, like you can't go and like on the shelf find a whole bunch of trained battery process engineer at the time in the United States, although with actions of LG and others, now they're easier to find. But instead you have to go to like industries. So what are the like industries that I was looking for talent from at the time? It was like candy. You laugh. Cigarettes, bottle, like making soda. What were the other things? There's some like pharmaceutical stuff, like syringes. There's super high volume things made in the US all day long, and have been for decades, with a whole industry of people like ramping yield. The person who runs the 4680 factory in Texas right now formerly was an Anheuser-Busch production facility manager. So it's more transferable than you think, and don't count it out. And again, I'm just describing one thing that I was responsible for, and it happened over 5 years. I think, to your specific question, what's the state of affairs? So I like to use some lessons from history. So in 2014, there was no silicon carbide really at all, and there were no real EVs using power electronics at all. And in 2024, there was over 4 terawatts of silicon carbide, of not just silicon carbide plus silicon, that went into EVs. Over 4 terawatts. That's an amazing number in 1 year. And that's in a decade. Actually, less than a decade, because 2014 really didn't count. Like, I think Tesla shipped like maybe 25,000 cars that year or something like that. So that's in 10 years. And then also, I'll do the same 10-year thing again. So in 2014, there was no utility scale storage at all. Like maybe somebody like, AES maybe deployed a couple handful of megawatt hour site or something like that. And then in 2024, it was like 50 gigawatts. Something like 150 gigawatt hours was deployed. And that's in 10 years. And Tesla had 30% of that market as a US manufacturer. So it doesn't have to be, it's not a given that it will be, China first or anything like that. I don't know if that's some. And it's not exactly the state of the situation.
But
it's more like it can be done.
Well, if I sort of aggregate your two views, Sam is saying we kind of like shipped it off and sort of lost an opportunity, but I feel something very hopeful in what you're saying, in that we actually can reacquire it very quickly.
I agree with the CPG analogy, because it's like literally all the stuff that we figured out how to automate in the 60s stayed in the United States. And those are the industries that like I was shocked when I was like, who's going to manage the cold chain for all the vaccines for COVID rollout? And somehow we just that was easy for us. Yeah. And like a micro example of like, what's the supply chain to get everyone in the United States vaccinated? It seems like that was no big deal. Meanwhile, it's like, there's a bunch of things happening behind the scenes that we probably don't even know about. But basically, like, but then you look at like, okay, why can't we do X, Y, and Z? And it's like the CPG industry actually is a really impressive thing in the United States. There's a second piece, which is like, I think that there is a vertical integration quandary that exists in the United States that like makes it easier for like a business like me to go overseas and work with contract manufacturers and stuff like that. Like, I'm not going to saturate a single cycle or like 100% of any one piece of manufacturing equipment, except for maybe our final assembly fixtures and stuff like that, because of like the volumes I'm doing are not what like say Elon could go and just like will directly. And so absent that, it's better for me to timeshare a shared manufacturing facility. Those services have kind of rotted out in the United States, and you do not, and historically you basically didn't really get attached engineering services, whereas in China it's like there's now all these underemployed engineers that are now working at manufacturing firms. So like if you go work with BYD, they can go design like a e-scooter for you, like, and it's like a couple $1 million for the entire program, and it's sort of this crazy thing you can go do there at this point. And it means that as someone who's running a business, it's like this is clearly the right move. Now, if you can get the volume and the demand up above a certain critical threshold, onshoring, all this other stuff makes sense. The people exist, all this other stuff. Yeah. But that's kind of, I think there's this sort of problem of like being able to reach the scale where verticalization works is incredibly tricky, especially for new businesses that, you know, frankly, like you're not going to be able to raise several $100 million up front in most if not all cases, even if you literally are some of the best entrepreneurs in the world.
You also have to acknowledge that like the diversified conglomerate didn't really like exist in the United States after GE.
Yep.
Right? Like, whereas Korea has so many, I mean, of which one of them is LG. Japan has so many, now China has so many. And like, how does that become sexy in the US again? You know, I mean, that diversified conglomerate, right? Where they're making washing machines and laptops and battery cells. Like, that's crazy. That's an amazing range.
Yeah.
You know?
Is this the tagline for this panel, make the diversified conglomerate sexy again?
But
I like it. I like my workshop a little bit,
but my underlying theory here is actually that the diversified conglomerate now can essentially exist off of 4 foundational technologies, which makes it a lot easier, which is like, okay, back in the day, GE had to be good at gas turbines, washing machines, like all these things use totally different technologies, and then like in the interest of efficiency, they were all kind of thrown away by, you know, managerial excesses of the 80s, versus realizing that like maybe you should just do the chaebol thing and make this work. But basically, the fact is like BYD. I've been to BYD's like showroom at their HQ, which is an insane facility, and like if you ever get a chance to go visit, you should definitely go visit. But basically, they've got like a monorail. They've got like a monorail that goes around their campus that they actually built, and like they offered that to cities in South America. But what's crazy about it is you go walk through all the products they make, and it's like every single thing uses the electrotech stack. Like every single thing, from like vapes to building scale ESS systems. Same shit.
All right, so build more vapes. Okay.
And by the way, they were like one of the biggest vape manufacturers in the world. Like someone made a Sora video of me testing vapes at BYD. Don't look it up.
Okay, so you guys have opened a door to somewhere I really wanted to get, which is like, what degree of onshoring should we be targeting? Because I actually think Tristan, LG is a very interesting sort of like friend-shoring case study in that obviously a Korean company, but a lot of the manufacturing is actually happening here. I imagine there's a lot of like skill transfer there. And then obviously Sam going over to, I don't know what countries you guys are actually setting up, agreements with, whether it's China or someone else, that is sort of maybe not, it's seen as bad, or especially if it's China. And so like, where is the line there? Is it like we must get those companies building here, or is there something? And how like are we actually progressing towards that? Like getting much more at home?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how fast you want to do it. I think to Drew's point, sure, you can develop all these high-tech manufacturing capabilities in-house if you have 10 years to do it, or even if you have 4 or 5 years to do it. But what if you want to do it in 1 year, right? And that's the sort of situation that I feel as though we're in right now. And to do it in 1 year, okay, there's some friendly countries out there that have this technology and have these skilled people. And we've got crews that, hey, they went and commissioned a bunch of factories in China, and then they did it in Poland, and then they've been doing it in the States. And you bring those crews around, you build that expertise, and you can get things up and running in 1 year and hit high 90% yields and not have to suffer through the doldrums of 70 and 80 and finally getting up to the 90s. And that's the way to scale, is to be smart about not just being completely myopic in the US manufacturing build out, but being smart about bringing people in, making sure you can train a local workforce, build that local workforce more quickly than you would otherwise if you're just sort of poking through the fog, as you would as you're learning something the first time. And so I think that largely that's been our approach is, we got to bring people in, we got to bring highly skilled people in who can come in and get everything working as quickly as possible, because we're right up against it. We're going to be delivering tens of gigawatt hours next year, and we're not going to do it effectively if we're going to suffer through that sort of scale up. But then you have to follow through and make sure your local workforce is then trained to follow and take it over, because that crew needs to go to the next place to go do it again, right?
Okay, so this is a very important bridge too to sort of like U.S. industrial policy, right? So I would just say, maybe I would put it this way: the current administration feels like their plan for energy dominance is to double down on the petrostate, which whatever. But let's imagine this path continues, and what feels very hopeful in a lot of what you're saying, Tristan, is that an organization can take the long view. Like you guys have, LG has decided to invest, Tesla has invested, in the past, and Sam, you may go spin up something abroad, but if you're taking like the long view of how things you'd want to do things in your organization, like, is there a consensus amongst you guys that that is the right thing to do for your organizations, like to do it locally? Or
I'll give you my contrarian.
Not just year one, but like hopefully around for 20 years, right?
I'll give you my take on onshoring, which is the straight up like, until you're at the volume where you can do it vertically, it doesn't make sense at a certain point. But once you've been, let's imagine I'm shipping 50,000 units a year. Oh, hell yes, it makes tons of sense. And the benefit though is, once you actually have that demand, then you don't have to go deal with VCs anymore. You can go to a bank and you can finance things just like LG does with these new facilities they're building out. And so I think that's something that's really, I think it's really important to be like, getting out of the Silicon Valley goggles mindset of like, okay, I need to get to the next milestone that then a VC firm can go and fund me to go build like a giant US facility. And it's like, no, I think the answer is banks. And making sure that you start from demand and pull the demand on.
So if that is true, does that mean we can win in the US, progress towards an electrostate, do more manufacturing at home without, like in a bottoms up fashion, like without a top down industrial policy?
Absolutely, I think so. And I was saying this to you before, like there's actually more overlap between the petrostate and the electrostate than people think. Like there's an incredible amount of power electronics, batteries, and everything else in actually, horizontal drilling and fracking. Like that thing is a like remote operated battery powered drill head. Like, that's operating at like crazy temperatures. And then there's power electronics on top to like run the pumps. And there's a lot of overlap and a lot of opportunities to push things forward. I also like to say, like, never let a crisis go to waste, right? So right now we have this crisis on time to power and growth of the power sector for AI, which everybody is excited about. Well, from my perspective as somebody that develops power electronics technology, fantastic. We need to do this, we need to do it fast. Like, obviously we're gonna make it in the US because for political reasons and for sheer like logistical reasons, that's the fastest way to get it done. And now we've like built that additional expertise, in the manufacturing supply base, in my team, in my customers, about what's great about, modern power electronics for any energy solution, And then if that's there for whatever the energy solutions may be, it's even more ready to go in the electrostate direction or in the renewable energy direction in the long run. And then, something I meant to say before, the Tesla Master Plan Part 3, what did it say? It answered the question, is it technically feasible? Do the resources exist? And is it like financially sustainable to go 100% sustainable energy in the economy? Like, that was the question. The answer was yes. And then the question is like, will we? And I think as Don mentioned, like the data all says we already are. It's just a question of like, can we accelerate in that direction? And every one of these interesting developments where there's a whole bunch of investment into the electricity sector in the US is like a critical opportunity to have the right outcome happen. Like we can't have rates go up. Like that would be horrible. We need the rates to not go up. For everybody in this room, don't let the rates go up. Because if they do, it's going to retard all the transitions. No matter what we do with component costs, magnetics, power electronics, batteries, if the actual delivered cost of electricity goes up faster than the pace of inflation or significantly faster than the pace of inflation, all this is going to slow down. Even in China it would, because they can't subsidize it forever. So it is an imperative to all of us to not let these crises go to waste. We have to end up with even lower electricity rates than we had before this growth started. That's the ambition, I would say.
Okay, so actually, you used the word imperative. I want to circle back to something that you said in your sort of opening, which is the question I've actually had on my mind this whole time, which is when does it become necessary, right, to pivot towards an electrostate for the U.S. when we're in this we're energy and that's what I mean, and not even like in a sort of like flippant way, is like doubling down on the petrostate. Like it works pretty fucking good, to be honest. Like we've been dominant for 100 years because of it. So it's like it's not. Unfortunately, I wish it weren't true. It's not crazy to say that that's like a bad strategy, right? But Sam sort of offered up the view that there's a point like within an organization, like locally, that there's like a necessary point where you're like, I have volume, of course I go, onshoring because it's just made my business better. And I think Don yesterday referenced that we now see the graph of China's deployment, and you're like, this feels like a Sputnik moment. Mm-hmm. And so I understand how like locally within an organization, you could have a necessary, it's necessary to onshore now, but like, are we already there on the macro level that, it can, in a sort of nonpartisan way, say like doubling down on the petrostate is a bad strategy and we must move in this direction.
Yeah, I think this is quite right. You know what it is? I think the reasoning you just have, and I hear this quite often in the US, right? So before this, I'm all suited up because I was on Wall Street pitching our story. And the counter argument is always like, it's been going well for 100 and something years. And it's a Kodak argument, right? Everything was well at Kodak until it wasn't. And it doesn't hold much truth if you actually look at the underlying drivers and you see that this is not actually holding any water. And so I think this is the main challenge for the United States, is that somehow the United States believes it's a petrostate. I actually don't believe it is. I mean, by all academic sort of definitions of a petrostate, it's not the exports of the US in fossil fuels is not a huge source of profit. It's not like tech, for instance. If the US is anything, it's a tech state, not a petrostate. And if you're a tech state today, why not become an electrotech state afterwards? This is we have this idea in the US that we're this petrostate, and we're anchoring ourselves to the ideas and mental models of the oil and gas business when it comes to energy. And that's limiting our degrees of freedom on how we can think about the future. And that, for me, is very reminiscent of just Christensen's innovator's dilemma. It's one of the things that I fear most, is that we're actually seeing this now at a sort of geopolitical scale, not an innovator's, but an empire's dilemma, that the things that made us very big in the US are actually what are now most putting us at most risk. Yeah.
So Mark Andreessen had this take from over 10 years ago called software is eating the world. And I think the argument here is the US is a software country in some sense. We stopped innovating the physical world in the 80s or whatever, and software then kind of took over as one of the engines of economic growth. Now, electricity is the only real form of energy you can directly control with software, thanks to power electronics, embedded compute, et cetera. And so I think some of this is actually, there's an argument that we're just going to let software take the wheel now, and these are the technologies that let software move the rest of the world. And so I think that's another framing of this versus the petrostate versus electrostate thesis, which is software's already in the world. We just have to admit that it also can move the world as well. There's a second point to this though, which is there's a really weird thing I've noticed, and I've been trying to unpack it. And maybe you have an answer to this, I'm not sure. Why is there only one dude who's actually built kind of large industrial scale businesses with this new electric stack in the United States? Why is it only one guy? And why does China have many businesses that have founders that you've not even heard of? And I think there's actually a policy reason for this, which is we essentially made it so you have to be just disagreeable enough to bust through all of the various barriers that you could get that will get in your way and get things totally screwed up. And I think people have different opinions about the person I'm referring to, but basically the point I'm getting at.
What is this, like, he who must be not be named?
Whatever.
Or something?
Yeah.
Like, what?
But the point is the dude ships and like and he's done this multiple times in multiple businesses, from like tunneling to spacecraft, and like and the weird thing is, it's like, where are the other Elons? And so I think that and then China appears to be able to have a regulatory system, a financing system, et cetera, that allows, I think Noah Smith came up with this term, which is a sub-Elon, or maybe I came up with this, I'm not sure, we can debate that. But basically, why can't a sub-Elon build a legendary electric tech stack business, right? And I think the answer is, and this goes, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see I'm big into housing politics and stuff like that, but basically we enshrine the physical world in amber after the oil crisis to try to like constrain growth and make people feel better about themselves, and like that's got to change.
Are you saying he's just an aberration then, or do you think?
No, I think it's like,
Sam, you're up here. I mean, can you be one of these guys or what?
I would prefer if the regulatory state was a little bit easier to let you build these things. But basically, but I do think that it's a very important question to ask that, and also an important question for policymakers to be like, well, if you are an anti-monopolist from the left, well, you should make it easier for other people to compete with Elon, right? Like,
I do have some thoughts. Having worked.
Yeah, who was the one shipping? Just by the way, let's get the record straight.
150,000 people at that company working really hard. I think it's a cultural thing. It's not just politics. Politics reflect the culture, right? And I've been to China a number of times. It's amazing. And there's absolutely a cultural, belief that investing in development, and development means, production and manufacturing and distribution and logistics and transportation and all of these facets of the built environment. Like there's a cultural appreciation for how that can improve the lives of other people in China. And the same is true in Vietnam right now, if you've been to Vietnam recently. I was just there. I think it is possible to get there in the Western countries, but they've also had it really good. The post-World War boom, pre-energy crisis was great for all of these nations. People have a good life, and it's a little bit harder to kind of like move the needle towards, maybe we do need more development. But we are seeing in places, in fact, you just said it, Italy.
Yep.
Chronic unemployment, Spain. Yeah. Also.
And they've historically been industrialized nations that are like, we need to reindustrialize.
We need to do it, right? And like parts of the US too, like Southeast. So I think, and areas like Michigan, like where LG is building their facility, right? And many facilities in the Midwest. Like, absolutely there are parts of the US that are gimme. When I went and built the mega factory in Lathrop, which is in the Central Valley of California, it was red carpet. Everybody was like, what do you need? Let's build this thing. So you just have to find that cultural alignment and you can get things done.
So maybe just for the sake of argument, I'd like to disagree with you, Sam, and see where we'll end up. Because I think actually we have had many Elon Musks here in the US, but they've just been hidden in companies that actually built in China. Like, I think this book, Apple in China, I'm not sure how many people have read it. It's excellent. So when you look at what the investment of Apple in China, we're talking about 1.5 Marshall Plans per year in terms of investment in China. If China is an electrostate today, surely it is that because we made it that. We put a lot of effort into it, a lot of money into it. Yep. And so I think it's true. Elon Musk is unique in the fact that he does it in the US, but I think a lot of this know-how on how to scale up and how to set just unreasonable standards on hardware manufacturers and keep pushing them. That is a lot of American know-how that we can apply at home, but we just chose to apply it abroad.
Yeah, I agree with this as someone who literally was one of the Americans teaching a Chinese company on how to build VR headsets for many years. And and one of the things that's really interesting was it's all the software-defined hardware stuff that the US has historically been great at. And honestly, a lot of it's we're kind of doing tech transfer to teach them how to do this sort of stuff. Yes. And I think Apple's a fantastic example. Apple gets extremely talented people right out of college, gets them business class flights to Shanghai or Shenzhen or wherever they're going, and they end up at the factory for 12 hours a day, well caffeinated, and by the way, the iPhone, the process engineering, the oversight of that is vertically integrated and done by Apple, and the abstraction layers they is United Airlines is how they get those people in. But it's almost identical to what you talked about, which is like I think they're the #1 customer of United Airlines. But basically, where a traveling team of factory builders goes to each site and builds up a factory, Apple does this per program with like the iPhone team comes in and they go get Foxconn ready and they go get Pegatron ready. Yeah. And they go and do the process engineer. They basically design the product with the production facility.
And I think this is the fifth Infinity Stone. So the 4 technologies, the fifth one is the know-how on how to click them together and how to this soft knowledge of how to click these Lego blocks together. And that's another one that we had and gave away, right? And I think it's a different level.
It started for reasons that are no longer true. It's like, labor is cheaper and we need a lot of labor. Like now all these lines are automated and like they could be anywhere. And a lot of the reason why it goes to the same place is because there's a consistent supply base that's super nimble and responsive that's done this many times. But you just have to make the decision enough times to do something different that you end up with the same ecosystem in a new place. And I think LG is leading the way. Other people are doing it along with LG on the battery side. Yep. In power electronics, my former employer, we did a lot to bring it back to North America. I'm going to continue to do it. I'm building a factory in North America for our first product. I think you just have to make that conscious decision, and it becomes a compounding ecosystem over time.
Just to add on to that, I think that there's the myth and there's the reality, right? And there's, going to China is the way to do it, and that's the way it's always been done, and that's why we will continue to do that. That's the myth, right? We need to relook at the assumptions in that one and say, no, actually, it makes sense to stay here. We're investing, battery manufacturing, but we're also investing in the broader ecosystem and the broader supply chain. We're working with Heron on a bunch of really cool stuff, but how do you make sure that you just have to recheck those assumptions and go back to first principles and say, is this still true? Right. And it is not true. Things do change. You can't just take the lazy approach and say, well, that's what the last guy did, so I'm going to do the same thing and I'll be successful, right? Just question. Be curious, question, and go do the right thing.
I think Tim Cook said, labor is not cheap in China. There's incredibly skilled workforces, right? And Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
Well, the other part of this too is I think the actual asset is being able to prototype with the production process. Yeah. And where if you can prototype with the production process, you actually can you're basically playing for keeps. Your prototyping is it can leave the lab and actually scale. And being able to figure out ways to do that, that is the thing that's important versus where you actually choose to manufacture.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel hopeful that enough organizations can make this decision independently. I think we've certainly aligned on that, especially because time just ran out. I have to take one big left-hand turn just to carry this on a bit longer. But there is one sort of structural reason that I actually don't see inserted in this conversation at all. So I just want to leave it as a question for people to leave with. We can talk about it a bit, but I certainly don't think we're going to solve this. But there is this concept called the Triffin dilemma, which is I think even originated back with Keynes, economic principle that if you are the global reserve currency, what that means is you have to fund dollars out into the system, and you do that by buying goods. That strengthens your currency against those exporters, makes it very hard to export. And so maybe a take on SpaceX and Tesla being successful is that those companies were so innovative in doing something so unique that they could overcome this dilemma, right? But when it comes to vapes, which actually do strengthen the ability to, as part of the electrotech stack, you get to build a workforce around that, right? And something more commoditized like that, it actually is very challenging just to overcome this deficit that we're running against, right? And not to mention that our reserve currency status was cemented in the 70s when we decided to introduce the petrodollar and that oil had to be bought in dollars, right? And so if we can do it, if you guys have any quick takes, we'll see, but do we have to disrupt ourselves as the global reserve currency if we're to be successful here? And if the petrostate had a petrodollar, then where is the electrodollar? Is there going to be one?
Oof.
We have 0 minutes, so let's just.
I'll give you.
5-second take.
I think the take is that
plenty of time.
Friendshoring is going to be more powerful than people think. I think for some of this stuff because it's okay, if you can go build a facility in Vietnam, you can build a facility in Italy, you can build a facility in UK of all places. there's actually some really interesting, you can solve some of these issues like, within your kind of alliance sphere versus having to necessarily solve them onshore. But then the other point, like what Drew mentioned, is like these factories are like lights out factories. So it's like if you just straight up, you could produce the stuff on site and like the equipment could be built somewhere else. You can essentially have the advantage of importing most of the machine equipment for that. And frankly, that's what happens with a lot of US facilities today. So I think there's a lot of nuance to this where it's like, assuming naively that everything will be vertically integrated onshore is probably not ever going to be correct. That's my main take on that. And then the electrodollar thing, I mean, isn't like there's all the crypto people want it to be Bitcoin, but like I would argue that there's kind of this like, I'm not sure how this is going to actually end up, but the thing that I'm seeing with energy and AI is like energy and compute being the kind, energy and thinking basically being like one thing, and that being in some sense the value here versus like, oh, I mined a Bitcoin and it's special. And actually we're seeing even today like Bitcoin mining firms are pivoting to doing AI data centers because it's more profitable because, well, intelligence is worth more than the coin. But yeah, I said.
But actually that's just a shadow currency for how affordable is the energy, right? Like the cost of intelligence is going to go at the cost of energy. And like, that's just back to the first imperative. Like, how do we make the cost of delivered electricity, which is how you're going to get to intelligence, as low as possible? And then we can export intelligence to the world, right? Like, that seems like a cool idea and a cool pathway to go down. Again, don't let any crisis go to waste, right? Like, how do we take that fact that intelligence is on, we're about to have God, as somebody said earlier. Like, okay, let's make sure God is renewable energy powered and as affordable as possible. And man, we're in a good position, so.
Yeah. Okay,
and my friends in Hacker House and SF are like the high priests of this god, apparently, because they helped create it.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I was not invited, so I'm doomed.
So all we've gotten is there's a weird convergence of power and intelligence. We don't really know what's going to come out of that, but maybe just a yes, no. Do you guys want the US dollar to stay the reserve currency? I will say I'm a no.
I will say we need to balance our budget if we're going to make any major changes.
Just start there. But I mean, is that? Can I pin you on a yes or a no?
I don't have an opinion. I think that if we were going to change how the currency markets work, the U.S. has to figure out how to balance its budget.
Yeah.
Like you can't have one without the other. So
Yeah. Sam?
My view is like a fundamental nature of the U.S. empire, which is the kindest empire in human history is probably the best way to put it, is that we are the global reserve currency and in some sense the world's police force, among other things. We set that up after kicking everyone's ass in World War II. I think it's a good idea to maintain that.
So it's a yes.
It's a yes, yeah.
Tristan?
I mean, I'm a yes, but you got to do it in the right way. I think there's a needle to thread, and you can do it right or you can do it wrong. And it's always, these questions are always much more complicated than a yes or a no. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it. And I will argue that the petrodollar is now the electrodollar already, because I've been many companies before LG where I was buying a lot of batteries, and not once did I buy a battery in Chinese.
That's
currency. It was
okay.
true.
That's good.
So, yeah.
All right, Don?
Well, I mean, yes or no, it hardly matters. I think it's not up to us, right? If you see what's happening in gold over the last couple of weeks and China stocking up, it's going to be up to emerging markets that are needing a lot of cash to develop. They're going to pick whoever they want to pick as reserve currency. And so we can fight or not fight for that, but in the end, this is going to be fought over real tech and real adoption of whether this is going to be Chinese electrotech or US LNG. That's going to determine whoever the reserve currency is. So this is not a conversation of whether we want to keep the currency close to us. This is a conversation of do we win the technology and the markets of the future.
Yeah, and it has been waning over time. That at least that much is.
You're right.
Yeah. Anyways, I just had to end on a hot take on the day. So I was just stirring the pot, you know? But anyways, this is a true yes or no. Will we be an electrostate in 50 years?
Yes.
Yes, and the tanks will be woke.
Okay, Kristen?
100% yes.
Hell yes.
All right, so we're gonna be great. Thank you guys so much.